Hey, what's going on? This is Kext Next, and today we're going to take a look at creating this super awesome missile scene in Blender without having to do a smoke simulation, because I always thought that having to do a big old smoke simulation just for some smoke trails was kind of silly coming from After Effects. Now, this is going to be a part of a mini tutorial series that I'm doing. This first video is purely going to focus on modeling and shading the missile, while the smoke trails will be in the next video. So if you'd like to skip this one and download the missile from my Patreon page, I'll be sure to put a link in the description. And subscribing to my Patreon really helps me out with these videos. It helps me create more content, and I really appreciate the support. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. First thing we want to do is, of course, delete the default cube, and we want to hit Shift A to add a new mesh, and we want to add a cylinder. Go to the Add Cylinder menu, make sure you change the cap fill type to nothing, so we have an open cylinder, and change the vertices to 12, so we have a 12-sided cylinder here. Let's go ahead and tab into edit mode, and we want to select everything with A just to make sure it's all selected, and go ahead and scale it along the Z axis. So hit S and then Z to scale it up, and we want to make it a little bit taller. And actually, let's go ahead and delete our camera and light because we're not going to need them. So just select them and hit X after going out of edit mode. So select our cylinder, go back into edit mode. And we want to go ahead and create a missile. Now, it's important to have a reference image, and I found this one in Google, and I think I want to kind of create these stripes on the missile to create some color variation. And I also want to kind of mimic these fins. So it has two fins, one long, short one in the middle, and one taller one at the end. So let's go ahead and create kind of the bounds for those fins. So go ahead and hit Control R to add some edge loops. And the first edge loop, this is kind of where the first long fin will start. So we'll kind of start it maybe about here. Control R, add another edge loop, and it kind of stops near the bottom, but we want to leave some room for that other fin. So maybe hit G twice to slide this little edge loop up a little bit, and then hit Control R, create another edge loop for the next fin, and it doesn't go all the way to the end, so we're going to create one more edge loop, and it stops right about here. So that looks pretty good. Now what we're gonna do is hit 7 on the numpad to go into top view, hit Shift Z to go into wireframe mode, and we want to select half of our cylinder, hit X and delete the vertices. And then we want to select this little quadrant down here, X, and delete those vertices as well. So we're just kind of left with this one side with the three faces going like that. So let's go to the modifiers tab and add a modifier, and you want to add the mirror modifier. And mirror it along the X and Y axes and allow clipping. And then we want to add a subdivision surface modifier, and we're just gonna play with this later, but for now, just turn it off. So to go out of wireframe mode, just hit Shift Z on the keyboard, and we're gonna go ahead and create these fins. So first fin should go along this face, so hit 3 on the number row up top to go into face selection mode, which is also, changing these buttons up here. So 3 is face selection. And select this face and hit I to inset the faces and create a little skinny region here for this first fin. And now we want to hit E to extrude this fin, and this fin is relatively short, so maybe about right there is good. And we can hit S to scale the face down, about like that. And then maybe we want to make the face a little bit skinnier, so we can hit S and then Shift Z to make the face kind of skinny, just like that. All right, so now we can go to the bottom down here and do the same kind of thing. Select this face, inset the faces with I, make it kind of skinny. And this one's a little bit different. If you look, it kind of goes up a little bit first before folding in, and we see this side is longer than the back side. So we're going to actually hit E to extrude just a little bit outwards, and then E again, and this is the taller part. And we want to hit S to scale down a little bit. And you can see that these sides are even right now, so if we hit G and then Z, we can kind of move it back a little bit. Maybe we can actually scale it down a little bit more. And then G and then Z to move it back a little bit, like that. And that looks pretty good, but before we move on to the next step, if we enable our subdivision surface modifier, because we're going to want to add more geometry to this missile, we can see it's messing us up a little bit and it's rounding stuff that we don't really want it to round. Oh, and make sure you turn the divisions up to 2. So to fix this problem, we're just going to add more geometry to the missile. So we're going to add our edge loop with Control R along this edge right here and just kind of sharpen out this edge and add another one. Pull it down, and if you want, you can even add an edge loop right here to kind of push the geometry. You can see over there it's kind of pushing the geometry towards the edge over here, like that. That looks pretty good. Maybe one more in the back could help as well. We just kind of want to fill in this geometry, make it sharper, but the subdivision surface is also still helping us. If you want, you can even add an edge loop around our inset faces and kind of push the geometry towards the fin a little bit. Kind of get rid of that taper. And we want to do the same thing to this fin up here, so Control R, add an edge loop, push it up to the top. Control R, add another edge loop, push it down to the bottom. Control R, right up there. Control R, right down here. And I actually kind of don't mind this taper, so I'm not going to add one along the inset faces, but that looks pretty good. So now what we're going to do is actually disable the subdivision surface modifier, and we're going to tab out of edit mode and apply our mirror modifier. So now if we tab back into edit mode, you can see we have a lot more geometry to work with now. Let's go to Vertex Selection mode by pressing 1 on the top number row, and let's select this little edge loop up here. So hold down Alt and click this edge loop and it will be highlighted, and we're just going to hit E and then Z, so we can extrude it along the Z axis, and we're just going to kind of pull it up a little bit. If we look at the reference image, you can see it kind of goes out a bit more before it eventually starts kind of tapering in. So we're going to create this little length of missile right here, and then we're going to hit E again and then Z and pull it up, and then press S to scale this edge and just kind of scale it in a bit, just like that. And if we zoom in here, we'll hit E and then S to kind of give it more geometry, and then we can hit G and then Z to move it up a little bit more. And there's 2 ways to fill this. You can hit Alt M to merge at the center and create a one vertex point, but I don't really like to do that because I like to keep my geometry all quads, and that will create triangles. So I'm gonna hit F3 on the keyboard and type in grid and select grid fill. And that looks pretty good. All right, and now we want to move to the bottom of our missile down here and select this edge loop. So hold down Alt and select the edge loop, and we can hit E and then S and scale it in just a little bit, maybe about right there, and then E, S again, make this one kind of small, and then G and then Z to move it up into the missile. And this is kind of going to become the thruster in the back. And we can actually fill this right here with a grid as well. So F3, grid fill. Yeah, that's fine. And this looks pretty good, but now, you know, if we turn on subdivision surface, it could mess with our geometry a little bit. Yeah, so down here especially, we want to add more geometry because we want this edge to be pretty noticeable. So we can hit Alt, select this edge loop, maybe scale it in a bit more to create more of a buffer. And we can hit Control R to create an edge loop around here, push the geometry down here, Control R inside, another edge loop, push the geometry kind of towards the bottom. All right, so now if we tab out of edit mode, our missile should be looking pretty good. Yeah, I like it. So we can right click on it and hit shade smooth, and that will get rid of all of those faces that we keep seeing. Let's go ahead and save our project, and I'll be right back. Just Control S to save. All right, I'm back. Let's go ahead and texture this missile. So first thing we want to do actually is hit tab, and we want to UV unwrap our missile. And I suck at this, so if I'm doing something wrong, make sure to tell me in the comments and kind of help me out if you see something that maybe could be improved. But right now we're gonna go ahead and add some edge loops because I want to create these stripes that you see on the side of the missile We're gonna do that with a texture paint mode. So Control R to add some edge loops and push them down. You can see they're flat when you make them, but when you push them down, they kind of become distorted. So there's this great add-on. It comes with Blender, and you can go to Edit Preferences, Add-ons, and search for Loop Tools. Enable it. If you right-click on this loop, go to Loop Tools and select Flatten. It makes it a flat line again, which is pretty helpful. So we're actually going to do that on both sides. Push it down here. Right-click, Flatten. That looks pretty good. And create 2 more edge loops, one down here, about that width, Control R, another one up here, about that width. All right, now what we want to do is kind of mark some seams. So we're going to select this edge loop, hit Control E, and hit Mark Seam, and hold down Alt, select this one, Control E, Mark Seam, Alt, Control E, Mark Seam, Alt, Control E, Mark Seam. All right, so we've marked some seams here. And then we can go ahead and mark a seam at the top. So we're gonna hit Alt, Control E, mark a seam, Alt, Control E. And I'm just gonna kind of go ahead and do most of the seams here. All right, I'm just gonna speed the video up at this point, but I'm just kind of placing seams where I think they make the most logical sense. Like kind of think about whenever you are making a 3D object out of paper, right? You want the faces to lay flat. And if you're making a cylinder, you would put one seam down the middle and that will unfold into a rectangle. You know, that's the kind of thing that you want to incorporate into your seam making. I'm putting them around the fins, around the circular parts, so that whenever it is unwrapped, they lay flat nicely and there's no weird distortion going on. Alright, so now that we have that done, we want to hit A to select everything, hit U, and select Unwrap. Alright, so now we have our little UV map here for our model with the seams all in place, but we want to go ahead and paint on our model. So let's go over here to the UV editor and hit New, and we can just create a new image. You can make it as big as you want. I'm going to make mine 1024 by 1024 and hit OK. And it's going to create this new black image. Okay, and we want to go over here to our missile, go to the Materials tab, add a new material, and then go to the base color, click this little circle over here, and select Image Texture, and then click this little button right here and select your image you just created. Mine is called Untitled because I didn't name it, I should have named it, but we're going to put that in there. So once we have our image loaded in, we want to go up here, and we want to select everything. We want to select all of the faces on the rocket, and go from edit mode to texture paint mode. And then over here, you want to go to the image editor, and you want to go to the paint mode over here where it says view, go to paint. And now you can paint on the texture and you can see it's affecting the rocket, or you can paint on the rocket and it will affect the UV, the texture over here. So what we want to do is actually create a mask because we just want to paint along those lines. So go back to edit mode and we want to select these faces right here. So hit 3 to go to face selection mode and kind of select these faces right here. All right. And before we actually go back, we want to go to our modifiers tab and make sure subdivision surface is turned off. That could cause some frustration. It might be pretty detailed over here when we don't want it to be. So let's go ahead and make sure all those faces are selected and then go back to texture paint mode. And this little button up here is called the paint mask button. If we click that, we'll only be able to draw along those lines, but we're going to do something even better. We're actually going to go back to edit mode and select the other line as well. All right, and then we go back to texture mode. So now if we go to the fill tool over here and you hit N on the keyboard to bring up your toolbox over here, you can see the kind of brush and the color that you're filling it with. Make sure that it is on white and even turn on subdivision surface so you can see what the final product will look like. We go ahead and click in these areas and you can see that they will be filled with white, which is exactly what we want. All right, so now that we have that done, we can go over here to this image and we may actually want to save it. So hit N to bring up the toolbox, go to image and hit save, and save the image somewhere where you can find it. And save it somewhere. And now you can kind of go back into object mode over here. And if you want to go to the material tab, you can see your jet's material. We can close out this tab over here with the UV editor by just kind of dragging from the corner of the screen to get rid of that window. And you can see our rocket now has some cool stripes on it, but this of course does not look very realistic. So we're gonna go ahead and add some texture to our rocket. I like to flip my rocket 90 degrees along the y-axis so I can kind of see it better. And we're gonna go down here to the bottom and drag up another panel and change the type to the shader editor. We're gonna go in here and do some stuff. So first thing that we wanna do is customize the colors of our texture. So you can see we have our texture loaded in here. We can hit Shift A and add a color ramp and put it right in there. And you can see now that we can kind of customize the colors. We select the little white thing right here and click on the color. We can change the color of the stripes because the stripes are white. I thought it'd be cool if they were kind of this deep orange, maybe like a darker color down here, like a browner one. Yellow stripes. I thought that'd be kind of cool. And then missiles, you know, maybe like a military green. Go over here to the black and make it a little bit brighter, but just visible, kind of like a dark green somewhere in here. Oh, that looks pretty cool. Another important step is to make our missile look metallic. So go over here and turn metallic up to 1. And we'll update a little bit. So now we have a full metal missile with our color ramp going on here. If you want, you can adjust the colors at any point during this tutorial. All right, so now that we have our missile, let's go ahead and add some bump to it. So we're gonna go down here, and this is going to be an EV shader. If you want, you can actually add displacement with cycles, but we're gonna be working purely in EV. So go ahead and add a bump node. So Shift A, we're gonna add a bump node. And by the way, I'm using a technique that I learned in a tutorial by, I think, Ducky 3D. I'll put a link in the description. It's very helpful and it's really cool for adding rust to your objects. So add a bump node down here, and we're gonna hit Shift A and add a noise texture. Put it right here and plug the color into the height. All right, now we have a crazy looking missile. We wanna add a mapping node and a texture coordinate node, and I have Node Wrangler enabled, which is an add-on. So if you select a node and hit Control T, they would come up. And we actually want to change the coordinates from generated to object so that it is distributed evenly across the object as Ducky 3D says. So this looks absolutely crazy and doesn't really look like metal right now. So we're actually gonna turn the strength down a bit, like 0.2. So it's barely on there, maybe even a little bit higher, 0.03. This is gonna be a very subtle effect right here. And we're gonna move these coordinates out of the way. We actually wanna turn the scale of the noise up pretty high to 40 so we get some more detail in there, and turn the detail up to 5. Get some depth. All right, and we're gonna add one more noise texture node. So go ahead and type in noise texture, add it right in here. And we're going to change the scale of it to 10. And the detail to 5. So now you can see we have this textured metal, but you can see it still looks a little too perfect for our missile. So we're gonna add some color variation in here. So we're gonna take these nodes, the color nodes, and move them up a little bit. And we want to actually add another noise texture. So we're gonna hit Shift A, add a noise texture, put it right here. We wanna change the scale to 10 and the detail to 14, and maybe the distortion to 0.2. So we actually want to add a mapping node to this as well. So hit Control T if you have Node Wrangler enabled. Otherwise, just Shift A, mapping, Shift A, texture coordinate. And we want to set the vector to the object. Now that we have that, we're going to add a color ramp. So Shift A, add a color ramp. And we actually want to flip these values right here and kind of push them into the middle, maybe make the white a little bit more gray. And you'll see what I'm doing in just a second. This color ramp right here is just going to be so that we can kind of add this noise texture into our image texture over here. So we're gonna plug the color into the factor for the color ramp. And we're gonna hit Shift A and add a mix node, mix RGB. Plug it in right here, and we want to take the color from this color ramp and plug it into the factor of the mix node. And you can see this is doing something a little weird right now, but we're gonna mess with that. We're gonna add another color ramp, so Shift A, color ramp and plug the color of the noise texture into the factor of this one as well. And we actually want to go track these a little bit closer together, maybe about like that. And set this to a very dark gray. And we want to add another node in here. Maybe make it a little bit brown, kind of ugly red brown. Very dark though, so it's barely visible. Move these kind of close together. And we want to plug the color into the other color on our mix shader. All right, you can see we have some variation going on here now, but it is a little too small once again. So maybe go over here to our mapping node and change these to, what was the other one? 0.2. Change these to 0.2. So this almost looks like camouflage if you look at it a certain way, but I just like how it looks. It's kind of giving you some dark spots on your missile. If you want, you can actually adjust this color ramp right here, and this controls kind of how much feathering is going on in the grunge, what it's affecting, and this white value right here, if you were to slide this, kind of lower the opacity of it if you wanted to, and if you made it more gray, it gets rid of it. And if you go all the way white, it's full black. So that's why I said to make it a little bit more gray, and you can kind of see it's a touch more realistic. As a matter of fact, if you go down here and you hit Shift A, you can create a value node and set it to 0.2. and take the value and plug it into the scale of this mapping node and the scale of the other mapping node. And then you just want to adjust the scales of your noise effect with this node right here. If you do want to adjust it though, you can see it makes the noise larger and smaller. I kind of like it at 0.1 actually. So I'm gonna leave it at 0.1, but you can see I have a pretty cool looking missile here now. You can see I have finished my missile. If you want, you can go into your world, go to the color, add an environment texture, just add an HDRI from somewhere. But yeah, now we have a super cool looking little missile here ready for animation, which we will do in the next part of this tutorial. And one more little quick tip before I end this tutorial. If you want to add more of your secondary color to other parts of your missile, like the fins, you can go into edit mode and select the faces that you want the color to be on. Like maybe if I wanted to do the fins, I just select these faces up here, and then I would kind of expand my selection. And once I have those faces selected that I want the color to be on, I can go over here to texture paint mode and make sure mask is on, go to my fill tool, and make sure the color is white, and then just press in there, and those faces will be updated to fit your color. If you go back to object mode, you can see it, so pretty cool. All right, now we have a animatable textured missile that we can use in our smoke simulation. Thank you so much for watching. If you don't want to do any of this work, I will provide the blend file plus the OBJ on my Patreon page. It means so much if you can support me. But if you do want to do this, I'm happy I could have helped you. If you have any suggestions or if you have any problems with my tutorial, please comment down below and I'll do my best to respond. Thank you so much. I'm KextNext, and I will see you in the next tutorial.